How you doing? The Cosmic Cowboy.
Man,
Cool.
how you like that? How many cosmic cowboys have you spoken to in the last week, Dale?
Uh, Zero. Well, I mean, well, we've emailed, so
Well, that's worth something. That is
yeah.
worth something. Well, Dale, hey, welcome to the Edge broadcast, man, and uh, ancient indigenous sounds and things like that. We're going to be talking about, and I'm sure this freaking the hell out of people watching the program. But we're going to keep them on the line because you got a lot of good things to say. So before we get going, I want you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Oh, absolutely. Name's Dale Allen Hoffman. Uh, I've been, let's just put it into a nutshell. I've been working with ancient languages for, oh, I mean, technically since I was 7 years old, looking at like biblical things mostly. I started with, my grandmother's collection of Greek Bibles, lexicon Bibles, Latin, things like that. Just kept I don't know. I just never seemed to find the right answers when I
Mm-hmm.
would ask the questions, and then I had to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to ask the right questions, I guess. But I just turned 50, and I'm right now on my getting ready to hit my 32nd year of teaching these kinds of insights publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the odd man out for a long time. Now people are calling me a pioneer, but I'm like, it didn't feel like a pioneer back then. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So Dale, what kind of knowledge were you looking for?
Honestly, I just wanted answers that made sense. But even like when I was 7 years old, the way it all started for me, it was the summer of 1979, and I sat on the floor of my grandmother's living room. And she was like a pillar in the Methodist church. Had that same picture of Jesus that everybody had, sort of looking up toward the light back in the 70s and 80s. And I laid out five of her Bibles and started comparing parts of the Gospel of Matthew to each other, and I just got a little confused. And I'm asking her questions, and uh, we always talked about this until she passed almost 10 years later. I actually think it was exactly 10 years later, but she, talked about how all the time, this inerrant word of God, the word of God, have faith, all these kinds of things. And I'm like, well, if this is, I don't think I picked up the word inerrant at that time, but I'm like, if this is the word of God, why is it different in these different ones? She was like, well, there's going to be a little bit of a difference depend on, and I'm like, well, if it's the word of God, though, how is it different enough? Me as a 7 year old, I'm like, it's different enough that I can see that this doesn't mean what this means. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't understand that. And of course, she said, you have to take it on faith. And I'm like, well, what is faith? And she said, faith will develop in time through faith. And I went, what? And I went to my minister at the church and I asked him the same questions, and I really didn't get the answers. And
Mm-hmm.
I just started digging. And I think what I was really looking for was not just an answer that made sense, but something I could feel, if that is clear enough. Something that would, I was like, if this is the word of God, it should be something that even me as a kid that I go like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I started getting little bits of that in the Greek for maybe 10, 12 years. And then all of a sudden, when the Aramaic started coming in, and it was a whole different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Hmm. So you saw conflicts in your religious upbringing?
well, yeah. Well, what was interesting is, I mean, I guess I'm thankful that I was raised Methodist. It was Evangelical United Methodist Church, Clarksboro, New Jersey. You'd think evangelical and Methodist were kind of didn't work together, but intriguingly for me, it's like I think I'm thankful that it was Methodist, because
Mm-hmm.
if I was raised Southern Baptist, if I was raised Catholic, I think I'd have too much guilt or fear wrapped around things. And to be honest, being raised Methodist, it just felt like something people did on Sunday, and they would
Mm-hmm.
go on Sunday, and it was, somebody would die, we'd go over their house and we'd eat food, we'd come home, and everybody was really nice. But I don't know what it was. There's something in me that, maybe because my parents were in the process of divorce, there was stuff happening to me at night, in relation to somebody in my family. and I just needed something to grab onto, and I felt like nobody had a lifeline for me.
Hmm.
Nobody.
Interesting. I just watched a Christmas story. Uh, I went to a Christmas story. It was a play, and I've seen the
Oh yeah,
movie.
yeah, yeah. Cool.
And so I guess in the play they go the kids are talking to each other, and one of the kids says to the other kid says are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? And he said, no, I'm a Presbyterian. So I mean, it kind of goes with what you're saying there, man. They're just sort of titles, but how do you know that it appears that maybe you have some your disgruntlement? I don't know if that's an appropriate term, but your your
I
impetus
think I
to
had it a long time ago. I
okay.
processed through that
So
stuff
how do you
decades
know
ago.
though that it was um, started with say the Methodist type of version of things? I mean, does that exclude your knowledge of say whatever the others are, like the Baptist and the Presbyterians and the
Oh, I didn't know any at that age. I'm 7 years old. My
mhm,
only exposure was going to the Methodist church on a Sunday, and we would go across town after that service and go to the
mhm,
Episcopalian,
mhm,
which I now call Catholic Light. Same great taste, less filling. But it was the Episcopalian church. We did that for years. It was very different. It was more pageantry, more all the candles, the dark woods, etc. So I mean, those were
mhm,
the only two tastes I had till I was 10 years old. Went with my friend Billy to a Catholic service, which was completely foreign to me.
mhm,
The kneeling, a lot of the prayers were very different. I guess you could almost say the ritual of it, because honestly, growing up Methodist, it was just like, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, the
mhm,
drone, so
mhm,
to speak, which
mhm,
isn't a bad thing.
mhm,
It felt warm and fuzzy on some level, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact of my parents' divorce. I was looking for some kind of something to
mhm,
grab, and I didn't have anything, and I didn't feel I was getting it from the church. And
mhm,
that's the point when I started spending more time outside and would often take the Bible with me. And it was weird because I mean I didn't talk to a lot of my best friend David at that time I talked to about it. By the time I got into my mid-teens, I couldn't talk to my friends about my Bible stuff because literally my best friend as I was a teenager would go would do this like retching thing whenever I'd mention Jesus or Bible.
mhm,
So
mhm.
um
Okay, so a lot of kind of different things going on in your life, and you're moving along now. So you're moving towards something else, I guess. Is that what happened? How did you start moving towards say in the direction that you find yourself at now?
well, I mean, when I was 7, that's when I started thinking there's got to be something else, feeling it. By the time I was 14, I was doing what I call riffing on the words of Jesus, and I still have those Bibles on the bookshelf next to me that some were my grandmother's, some were my mother's, where I would actually go to at that time when I was 14, going to the red words, the words of Jesus, and I would write them down on a piece of paper, and then not in relation to lexicons or any of that kind of stuff, which I still hadn't fully grasped into yet, just writing down like pages and pages about what I felt was being said. Like, what did it mean to me? What was he
Hmm.
really talking about? It's why I call it riffing. It's almost like an improv thing. I remember showing those to my mother once, but nobody ever read them. I didn't write them so somebody could read them. I wrote them because I had to. Like, it was enabling me to kind of focus my thoughts a little. And then when I was 21, that's when, after several years of hearing about Aramaic this or Hebrew that, that's finally when it clicked for me when someone said, Dale, you should check out the Aramaic. And I'm like, Arabic? And they're like, no, Aramaic. And I'm like, what, and I had heard about it. It just didn't click. And they're like, yeah, that's the language Jesus spoke. And that's when all of a sudden a light went pop. And I went, wait. And this was the thing that it took me to be 21 before it clicked. I went, he didn't speak English. And of course, it was my friend Mitch down in Florida. He's
Hmm.
laughing at me. And that's when all of a sudden, like the room starts closing in. And I'm like, hold on a second here. I'd never thought that he wasn't speaking English.
Hmm.
And that's when I started digging in. I'm 50 now. So
Hmm.
that's like what, 39 years
Hmm.
ago. But
So Aramaic, can you speak that language?
I could speak some, yeah. I mean, the funny thing about ancient Aramaic is nobody, although some people can lay claim that they do, nobody can be fluent in it because we don't know exactly what it sounded like. Um, I can pick up a text. I can read Estrangel and Midyat, different forms of Aramaic. Um, I lost attention with that, probably in my like late 20s. I was like, I realized it wasn't in the language itself. There was something more happening. That's when I started tracing backward to things like Proto-Semitic, essentially the first alphabet, which is more related to Egypt, but also comes from a Semitic line. And I started kind of going backward almost in more of an anthropological sense of trying to find not necessarily the mother tongue. We'll never find that, but some kind of source roots where things, maybe a better idea of where things were coming from, not necessarily the Jesus teachings,
Mm-hmm.
but more the sounds of the alphabets. And
Mm-hmm.
why was it that, the letters in Proto-Semitic, why was the aleph an ox or a bull? Why was the bait or bet a house?
Mm-hmm.
Why were all those, having some kind of a symbology? And if you'd read the old stuff, it would say, well, essentially, these sounds they believed would exemplify states of being that were reflected in the way they were, the letter shapes, etc. Reish is head. Shin was a lip with teeth underneath it. It meant shine, sheen, express.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in my late 20s that I really started digging into that. And that's when I started getting into the more, I guess you could say, mystical, digging into the Kabbalah, digging into the work
Mm-hmm.
of people like Stan Tenen, who I found when I was, I guess, about 23, one of the first major people of the late 20th century who was really finding true algorithms in the Bible, especially in the five books of Moses,
Mm-hmm.
especially in Genesis, Bereshit, but especially in the first verse of Genesis. He's the
Mm-hmm.
one that was revealing the star tetrahedrons and the double torus and all these different things that were created just by the algorithms within that text. Which, here's
Mm-hmm.
an interesting thing: most people have no clue, including so many Bible experts, that the original Bereshit, the original Genesis, it was almost 1,000 years before that went from being just a string of characters like a mathematical algorithm with no spaces and no words. It was just strings of letters.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't know it was almost 1,000 years before those were broken. There was final markers put on certain letters, and that was starting to be broken down into words that were then ultimately, a bit of time after that, looked at in the sense of some kind of an ideology. Like people will say, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's one of 913 plus ways that you can translate the first line. But unfortunately, what happened was, when that starts going into the Septuagint, which of course is 70 in Greek, in the Koine Greek, all of a sudden we're now having conceptual relationships with these concepts rather than having those direct vibrational experiences, which
Mm-hmm. So,
fortunately in the Hebraic culture, they're still toning it
so,
today.
so, did you find information in the tones of the ancient text?
The only way I can put that is this: it's not a cognitive, intellectual pursuit in that sense. Although when you're looking at the letters and things like that, you can approach it that way. For me, it's more, you could say, put it this way: truth is a direct experience. I can talk about a concept, I can walk around it, I can write books about it. But when I get to the place where I don't have words for something, that it's that, like, as an example, just being in the other room with our 6-month-old baby, Eowyn. And I mean, if somebody were to walk up to me and say, what do you feel about her? What do you think about her? What's your opinion on her? I would just say, I have,
Mm-hmm.
why would I want to put that into words? I started realizing that what I was looking for as a kid was something that would make me speechless, something that would rock my world so much that I shuddered even at the thought of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the places I started getting into, which was interesting because there was a lag effect of people that were still coming to me looking for more language based stuff, like in terms of something more intellectual. And I was like moving into these like open spaces and these like cracks between dimensions and things of that nature
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't really have words for a long time. And it's amazing how you can make a sound. And I'm not aware of any technology faster than a tone. And that includes breath work, which I've done for decades, meditation. Sure, if you've been meditating for 30 years, like, you can get yourself into a deep place just by awareness. But for a newbie, no. Or any other kind of technology that just by a simple oh, just making an ah sound for 3 seconds, and I'm in a completely different place than I was before. And that's the first letter of most of those, almost all of the ancient alphabets. What was the reason for that? Why did they call it an ox? Why did they call it,
Mm-hmm.
So when I started looking into those, I started realizing these were, in the way that Stan Tenen says, he speaks of the letters like the footsteps on the floor in the Arthur Murray dance studios back in the 50s and 60s, where you'd have, the left and the right, the blue and the red, and you'd have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if you would just stick your footprints, in other words, kind of step into the map in that actual pattern that they were giving us, that you would be able to, experience the dance.
Okay.
So,
okay. All right. Let's get to a few questions coming in for you. It says, Dale, do you understand the ancient Gaelic?
I don't understand Gaelic, but I will say this. The thing about Gaelic, and I would say even more so Welsh, there are absolutely direct connections to Aramaic, to the Semitic lines, also in Ge'ez and Amharic, which are down in Ethiopia, Somalia. No, I don't, but as a matter of fact, we were just over in Europe a couple of months ago, and I was completely overwhelmed by some of the root sounds, not the letters per se, but you could say the alphabet, and people were like swarming me with all this kind of stuff that I couldn't even keep it in my head. So there's I will say no, but at the same time, I know there's a lot of connections. I just haven't had the time to dig in. So.
Okay. And then here's a question from Doug in Virginia. It says, Dale, what language did Yeshua speak?
Well, he spoke Hebrew, of course, because he was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here, let me put it this way, okay? There's more problem, and of course, Aramaic was I say lingua franca, although I'm using a Latin phrase. So it's Hebrew and Aramaic. But the thing that's interesting is Hebrew was used mostly in the temples at that time. Colloquially, people spoke Aramaic. But there's more of a problem of when we start asking specific questions about Yeshua, is that we really don't know almost anything. We don't know who wrote these texts. We don't know if he actually said them. There was nobody walking behind him with a dictaphone. If at the time, if you were to imply that the word of God was written on a page, you committed a blasphemy. So we start having that kind of problem too. We start having these relationships with structures on a page instead of the actual experience of the words themselves. But pretty much most people are in agreement that obviously he's going to speak Hebrew, being Jewish, and that especially in the Galilee, which is an Aramaic word that means wheel, or Nazareth, Nazarit, which means initiate, he would have been speaking Aramaic, and a very specific form, I would say, at that, because even in the Bible, you'll see that they'll say, oh, I can hear you're from the Galilee. That's like if I go to Boston and everybody's talking like that, and I go up speaking like Jersey or Southern accent, people are going to be able to hear the difference. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have this question. How did Babylon get to speaking Arabic? Aramaic.
Arabic or Aramaic? I mean,
I would say Aramaic. Aramaic.
Aramaic. Yeah. What's interesting is Babylon, the entire idea of Babel, the entire idea of Babylon. Funny, one of my language coaches, I should say, is a guy named John McWhorter of Manhattan College. He wrote a great book called The Power of Babel about maybe 10 years ago. Interesting thing for me, when I started digging in to a lot of the more cultural ideas, that's when my eyes started glazing over. I was going to all these symposiums, going to all these Semitic conferences, etc., and noticing that there was all this discussion about, as an example, and histories that are absolutely, let's put it this way, look at it, just jumping over to America for a second here. People, if I say a phrase like, okay, I cut down the cherry tree, I cannot tell a lie. You ask an American who said that, and they'll say George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say that. That's from a biographer 100 years later. Nobody, how many people actually know these kinds of things? Or as an example, you go to a car accident and 10 minutes earlier, it just happened. You ask 10 different people what happened, you get 10 different stories. My point I'm making here is When I was in my teen years, I had read a book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which was about indigenous America. And it was reframing how everything that was in my history books was incorrect. One of the things about Babylon is it's one of those subject matters that when I came up face to face with, I couldn't get clear answers. And I have to say, we don't know exactly what happened. Most people won't give you that clear answer. If I go and read 10 different books, I can think of Gazella's book here. I don't want to go off screen, but that came out a couple of years ago. He's saying stuff about the history of Aramaic that people had never said before, that all of the history books were having particular ideas, and he comes out with something totally out of left field. The truth is that I can give you ideas, but we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know a lot of things.
Okay.
So
All right. Believe in the live chat. By the way, people watching the program are putting their questions in the live chat. That's where I'm getting them from right now. What is your background educationally?
educationally,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a civilian scholar. Yeah, that's the way I said it for a long time, but essentially, something told me not to go the theological route. It was an interesting thing, some guidance I got early on from one of my earliest Semitic coaches, which was basically telling me, he's like, if you go to school, you're going to go to a theological seminary, and I did not. He's like, you're going to get programmed with a particular set of information, and then the more you're able to parrot back the program, the more you're going to be considered an expert. And I think the greatest piece of advice he gave me was like, just stay away from that route and follow your heart. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I don't get listened to by a lot of people, because I've read most of and studied most of what a lot of others have looked into. But I'm not as interested in, like I say, that physical conceptual part of me wasn't what interested me. I think it was in the beginning. It was the parts that made my heart blow wide open and
Mm-hmm.
me to go into these different transdimensional states. And it's simply not allowed
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of pretty much everything I learned was one-on-one from Assyrian Aramaic speakers, Semitic speakers, Hebrew coaches, but very almost nothing from schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Um, okay, let's get this question here. By the way, in the New Testament, Paul's talking and he says he met somebody, whether he was in the body or whether he was not in the body, he couldn't tell. So that tells me there's a lot of heavy duty spiritual things going on there. You talk about trans dimensionalism and things like that. Wouldn't that be part of this type of thing that you're seeking?
Well, it could be. It's interesting because if you look at like just, we generally have Pollyanity, is what I say, tongue in cheek. But if you actually get into the textual analysis of the things that are attributed to Paul, and this I have to, one of my greatest teachers is a woman named Elaine Pegels, who was at Princeton. I guess she might still be at Princeton, but I call her one of the rock star scholars. But she's one of those ones, along with like Marcus Borb, Shelby Spong, different people that put the idea that as much as 2/3 of what's attributed to Paul were actually possibly later forgeries. It's an interesting thing about Paul, because Paul, uh, I think he got certain things, and I think what was really to me very human about what he recorded, what he put down for us, was that he spoke a lot of his own frailties. But intriguingly, if you pay attention to the texts that we absolutely know were his letters, and that was a traveling dude. If you look at the maps, if I look at his map today, 2,000 years later, it blows my mind. But when I think about the amount of travel he had to do back then, it's
Mm-hmm.
completely insane.
Mm-hmm.
But he always talked about Christ as a vision of light. He didn't really have a lot in his letters about some physical man named Yeshua, which is kind of an interesting little side note. If you look at the work of, so I'll look at everything. I'll look at atheist material, satanic material, alien material. But if you look at the work of Tim Freak and Peter Gandy, they actually propose, as also somebody like Peter Joseph, if anybody's ever seen the Zeitgeist films, or Acharya S. She was a friend of mine that passed a few years ago, but they proposed Jesus never existed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's a funny thing. When I first started hearing that, I balked. And I'm like, well, none of this makes sense. What am I doing? And it took me a while to kind of get my heading again. But what's interesting about moments like that, me listening to people that had the exact opposite wavelength, where they were coming from, or opinions that were totally opposite of what I was thinking, I noticed that's what was allowing any kind of bias that I might have in my head to start shaking loose, meaning that I was listening to the people that it almost was completely uncomfortable to listen to.
Hmm.
But it started opening me up, and I started realizing it was less important what I thought I did know, but rather, after all these decades, if there's anything I know, it's that I don't really know anything
Hmm.
about it, but I know what it feels like to be open. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. All right. We have this question here. Have you watched sand resonance on paper with sound and used that concept on different languages?
Oh, you almost want to make me cry with that. So that's cymatics. Funny because you heard Joshua's show the other day. Joshua P. Warren and I, we've known each other 20 years. We've
Hmm.
done a lot of cymatic experiences. And one of the things I think I was on his show, I talked about an amazing video that's out by Nigel Stanford. He's an Australian guy, and it's just go on YouTube, look up cymatics. Um, and I mean, that's something that a guy named Ernst Clodney isn't back in the 19th century had. It was an iron plate, and he had some really pure, like glass sand shavings. And what he did was he just, for whatever reason, started deciding to drag a violin bow against the plate, and it started making these really amazing figures. You'll see those in the Stanford video. They say that in Sanskrit, they say that the Om that we all know of, that
Hmm.
classic Om
Hmm.
figure, came from a cymatic experience in a meditation from somebody actually making the sound. So
Hmm.
it's a part of, some call it pseudoscience, but it's literally showing how vibration literally organizes matter.
Hmm.
And I've had a lot of experience with, we've done lots of experiments with that, which, sand or iron filings, etc., but also using even digital replications of cymatic things that I've done at my events, where I'll go and have like 3,000 people, and I'll start toning, and you'll be able to see the waves on the screen. I think that's something that we really need to start looking deeper into.
Hmm. Okay. And here's Peter from Australia. Says, Dale, what is your opinion of the Septuagint?
Yeah, so it's funny that, at the time when that happened, when that went down, we're talking before Jesus ever walked the earth. When that went down, the rabbis of the day were literally howling and wailing, saying, look, they're like, this is horrifying, the worst thing that could ever happen, because now the people of the future are going to think that just this one singular, what's called Peshat, which is the top level, Peshat, Remez, Darash, and Sod, the Pardes, which of course is the acronym for paradise. It's the four levels of exegesis or translation. They were saying that people are only going to see the top Peshat level that's in this Septuagint. It's called Septuagint, which is 70 in Greek, which is about how many scholars it took to translate it over the course of about 200 years. Um, when I really started getting into the gravity of the Septuagint, and I started really looking into the difference between, I'm not going to have the same experience in 2022 looking at the Hebrew Torah versus a Greek Septuagint that someone back then would have, because they're having all these multitudes of layers and experiences and vibration. um, Part of me, a large part of me wants to say that it was almost like that original vibrational experience was incredibly neutered that day. And for the longest time, some people say Jesus, of course, only was working with the original Torah. Other people say no, they were using the Septuagint by then, which is kind of a sacrilegious idea, but maybe that's possible too. We don't really know. If you look at the King James, they're like, oh, look, went back to the original Hebrew. But if you go into the actual timeline of what happened with the 1611 King James, they were mostly just going back to Septuagint as well.
Hmm.
Basically, this is here's the original Torah in my sense, and here's the Septuagint, and that doesn't make it worse or bad. it's kind of like lowering the resolution on a photo. You can still make out what it is, but you're not going to have the same experience, as it is going from VHS to 8K or something.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. In all this research, uh, are you on the search for a encounter with the divine creator?
no, it's there. I mean, here's the interesting thing, and this came through a lot of these toning experiences and the breath work. It took a while to realize that I couldn't know God in that sense. The phrase that I always say is what you're looking for is what is looking. And the funny thing about truth is it's a direct experience that will literally render one, you could almost say, mute. And for me, those experiences happen. It doesn't, none of what I learned helped. None of the book smarts helps. The intellect doesn't help. It actually really only helps when I'm able to, regardless of everything I think I know, just let go. And when I say let go, I mean that was known as the eye of the needle,
Mm-hmm.
Huria in Aramaic. Funny that, that original translation, they say a camel through the eye of a needle, and they talked about there being a doorway in the walled city of Jerusalem called the eye of the needle, which isn't true. That was made up about 100 years ago. But the actual word isn't gamla, it's gamala in Aramaic, which isn't a camel through the eye of a needle, it's a braided rope.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to get a camel through the eye of a needle unless you're really grotesque and gruesome and you do it one cell at a
Mm-hmm.
time, and it's going to be very bloody. You
Mm-hmm.
can get a braided rope through, though, and that's the untangling. That's the shbuk, which is that word forgive, which actually means to completely untie or to let go, to cancel something.
Mm-hmm.
You can unwind those belief systems, the BS that we have, and start putting things through a strand at a time.
Well,
You
Dale, when
know,
you're talking about a strand or you're talking about a camel, the premise of that, I believe, was that uh, Jesus was saying that everyone has sinned, and so nobody's going to go to heaven. But it's impossible for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. But with God, all things are possible. What he was saying was, even though within your sins, as they be that as they are, and you deserve punishment for that, the miracle of a camel going through an eye of a needle, because with God all things are possible. In other words, it may seem impossible for you to get to heaven, but you can, because with God is all things are possible. So does it really matter if it's a camel or a rope?
well, it doesn't matter in that sense, in the sense that it does matter that it's a rope, because that's something that can be done very mindfully, rather than, and he's not saying something can't be done. And I'll say that in Aramaic, it's much, much more clear than that. And it's something that, it took me a while to be able to have enough of the actual experience in that to realize what he was saying. The eye of the needle is something that it's not only in the Jesus teachings, and also when he would say, I am the gate, that's the word tareya, or the veil of the temple, ape tareya de haikla, Matthew 27:51. Tareya is a word that means portal. It means an open space. And when he's talking about I am alone, he clearly wasn't talking about himself, because if he was talking about himself, he would say ana
Mm-hmm.
tareya. Or
Mm-hmm.
as an example, I am the breath of life, ana lachma the high. But he didn't say ana as in I Jesus. He
Mm-hmm.
said ana, which in Aramaic is very literally I, the eye within the eye behind the eye. When that went into the Greek, it became in the koine ego eimi, which is I, individualized self M. There's no word for M in Aramaic. In Aramaic was actually the I. So what he's talking about is that deeper place within us. The problem is people are thinking that something physical can't get backward into heaven, but they have the whole thing backward, because this world, this isn't what's real. This isn't what's real. They're trying to take something and run the whole system in a way that, it's funny when you start to realize that he was talking about being in this world, though not of it. And he had so many words for it. The primary word he used was mamuna, which of course they just translated as money. Mamuna is a very interesting word, because what it means is materiality. It means that what your brain is telling you, all this physical stuff, is what's real.
Hmm.
And another interesting one from Paul, where he taught, is it First John, First Johannan? He talked about where he was talking about, the root of all evil.
Hmm.
Interestingly, and that word was kespa. Not money is the root of all evil. What kespa means is not physical money. Let's exchange money. What kespa means in Aramaic is the belief in the illusion of a rate of exchange. That means that somehow I can give you something that when I give it to you, now you feel that you're somehow richer because of a possession, something physical, self-worth, whatever, or somehow I can take something from you that makes you less. But Yeshua's teachings weren't about us becoming any kind of a conceptual anything in any way, shape, or form. What he was doing was showing us that this isn't what's real. What's real is what's looking.
Hmm.
Most people that can't let go of their intellect, they'll never understand it, and that includes most of the disciples. He told them flat out over and over, just in the standard four gospels alone. He said over and over, basically, you guys are my front line. I'm paraphrasing, but you don't get it. How are they supposed to get it if you don't?
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's not going to happen, between the ears, so to speak. But
Okay. Um, well, it does say that the mind can't know the things of God. That's for sure. Timix1 says, Dale, do you believe God has sent a great delusion down to mankind?
people have to understand the nature of what we're talking about when we say God, or the phrase God sent, or sending a delusion. In order for an absolute, I shy away from the word oneness, because oneness in mathematics implies two. It implies zero, one, two, etc. Uh, but in order for something, let me put it this way: the word Yeshua used for God, he didn't use Elohim, one and many. He used Allah, which in Aramaic, literal translation, absolute only, keyword being, absolute only being. People aren't understanding that, like, as an example, what we call the Old Testament was about some kind of overarching power that people were misunderstanding. Like, they were misunderstanding human frailty, human screw up, as somehow the will of God. They were taking the many and trying to turn it back on the one. Yeshua came and he said, look, very clearly, there's nothing outside of the one. There's nothing outside of Allah. The al literally means one or only. And what's interesting about that, you start to realize, in order for something that is absolute and fully single, in order for that to birth itself out, it has to break itself. It has to, in other words, turn it to some sense of a duality.
Hmm.
And that's what the idea of the Father, which is the absolute, the Son, which is the creation, and not the Holy Ghost, but the Ruach HaKudsha, the whole, all-embracing, feminine, not masculine breath of the absolute. And when you start to look at that, you start to realize how much we almost set up all that. We have this human anthropomorphization of putting these human traits back on an idea of a conceptual God, rather than realizing that, we are, I say it in the sweetest sense, it's almost like one tiny little cell. I use my light pen here a lot. We're just one little dot here, and we make the mistake of believing there's seven people walking across the earth, when in reality there's only one. But
Hmm.
and that's literally when people say, yeah, Jesus spoke as God, and that's a literal statement. And I'm like, he didn't think he was God. He didn't even just know he was
Hmm.
God. He was, but the concept part wasn't there as much. He was trying to share that for other people.
Hmm.
It's like the idea of the demiurge, or all these different things in Gnosticism. These aren't God created things per se, although in a sense everything's within that one. It's our own junk basically smacking us back in the face.
Hmm.
So
Okay. Our moderator, Jay, says, Dale, so with your knowledge of the ancient languages, have you, how do you interpret the triumvirate of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as one being?
well, it's kind of what I just said is, if you, and that's not a Christian idea, it goes back far before that, as much as 10,000 years, but the Father is the absolute. What we're saying by that, it's not Father masculine. People have to understand what masculine and feminine even mean. But what that's really saying is an absolute, the undivided. There's no other. It has no other. And then the Son, of course, is the creation. It's not just the child, it's all of the physical universe, etc. And then not Holy Ghost. Funny, in the 1611, it says holy with a lowercase h, ghost with a capital G. I'm like, what in the heck is that supposed to mean? It capitalized the H at least for holy, but that's that the breath, the spirit. That's the rucha spirit. In Aramaic, rucha literally is the word breath. It's the word magnetism. It's the word, you could say, radiation today, nuclear forces, etc. And that's that feminine. That's the life within all. Unfortunately, it was taken by the church, very much the Catholic Church, and turned into a conceptual physical thing. And as soon as you take something that's a direct experience and essentially, make it into a physical concept, you essentially neuter it and kill it.
So you don't believe in the masculine aspect of God?
No, I'm saying you have to understand what masculine means. Most people, including people that have been studying the Bible for 50 years, don't know what it means. I mean, what's the concept of masculine that you, and I'm speaking from a 2,000-year-old understanding there. What would you say the masculine means?
Male, father.
What does male mean? Seriously, what is father or male? What do those actually mean? What does
Hmm.
masculine mean?
Hmm.
We have this, a weird understanding, and I'm not saying you, but odd
Hmm.
understanding today. People don't understand. I think what gender means
Hmm.
in these
Well,
kinds
I
of
think,
teachings.
well, I mean, I agree with you. They don't understand what gender means, and there's definitely a lot of political uh, background to this, where people are saying there's no such thing as a male or a female, and these types of things. Men can get pregnant. So, man, you're kind of veering off into that kind of area when you talk like that, aren't you?
Well, I'm not veering off into that area because you can't answer. I say it with all the love in my heart. You haven't answered the question yet. What do you think masculine means?
Okay. Well, I would say in biology, it means the male figure that has certain chromosomes that make them different from, say, the female.
So you figure that when Jesus is talking about father, he's talking about something on the physical level, you're saying? That has to do with chromosomes or DNA or a physical
Uh,
innie or
a
an
t-
outie, like a penis
that
or a
no,
vagina?
that would be a type and a shadow. That's how I would view it. Type and a
Okay.
shadow as a fatherly figure, a male figure being a protector, a builder, a caretaker of the female type of thing to look over her welfare, to look over creation
So that would
as
be
a
called a
father.
misogynist view. Interestingly, until about maybe 750 years before, and I'm not being critical in that sense. I don't
I
want you to
understand.
feel it that way,
No,
but
I don't.
about 750 years prior to Yeshua's birth, up to that point, according to all anthropology, we were in a completely matriarchal society. And an interesting thing here, well, let's just go back to the question first, masculine.
Mhm.
It's actually very simple. It has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with even biology. It just has to do with basic physics. Masculine is, let me look at it in first in the physical sense and then in a little bit more of a, you could say, mystical sense.
Okay.
Masculine's like an arc of electricity. It projects, period. The feminine is magnetism. She draws in, she nests, like you could say breath, that's feminine. Magnetism, feminine, etc. In terms of language with Aramaic, my observation of this pen is feminine. The actual pen itself is masculine. Okay.
Okay.
Now, another way of looking at that as well is if I go like this and breathe on my arm, I'll say to people, what is that? What is that I just felt on my arm? It's a simple, you don't even have to answer it. People always say, what? I say, what is it? They say it's breath. I'm
Hmm.
like, that's not breath in the Aramaic understanding. That's hot air.
Hmm. Hmm.
Breath in Aramaic is a feminine gendered term, which means that it can't be a physical
Hmm.
thing. Wind is another example.
Hmm.
People say, all right, hold on a second. How can breath not be physical? How can wind not be physical? Because in the Aramaic culture, it was not the hot air in my lungs that was considered breath. the physical thing, the projection, you could say, the masculine, but rather my feminine perception of its frequency or movement.
Hmm. Well, I mean,
Another
as far as
example,
it
when you
was,
hear wind, wind isn't what I'm feeling on my skin, but rather my perception of its
mhm,
movement.
mhm.
So the difference between, in order for the absolute to birth out, it has to instantaneously create masculine and feminine,
Okay.
which is, of course, projection and you could say breadth, so to
So
speak.
we're
Until
talking.
somebody has the direct realizational experience of that, it's like trying to explain Mars to somebody
Mhm.
that doesn't know, anything beyond the Earth.
So
So,
but we're talking about a supernatural creator, but in the natural, do you believe there is a male and a female?
well, there has to be.
Okay.
There has to be in terms of, there has to be some kind of, expansive force, and there has
Hmm.
to be some kind of
Hmm.
retraction, not
Hmm.
contraction,
Hmm.
retraction, big
Well,
difference.
the Bible
So,
describes God.
but interestingly, though, I'll say this. If we, and this is exactly what Yeshua was teaching about taking our eye off the physical.
Mhm.
It's an interesting thing to see people confusing, let's put it this way, what more truly been, open, absolute, self-created being could there possibly be than after thousands of years of what I would almost call, a little bit of a over focus on masculinity, started to find a way to bring more feminine energy through a masculine appearing human and more masculine energy through feminine humans. Now,
Mhm.
people will ask me a lot of times, do I feel it's right or wrong? All this LGBTQ, everything. I'm like, well, right or wrong doesn't have anything to do with it. What's interesting is the problem we have is in the judgment. The problem isn't in it itself. And it's just all I can say is when your heart's been peeled back enough, you start, you kind of stop dropping any kind of a pointer at things. Let me
Mhm.
give you another idea of that. People often have this like, there's like sort of the hippie-ish idea of this utopia where everybody lives in a peaceful society and we all sing kumbaya. And I have a very valid question I always ask in those cases. I'm like, well, where would Ted Nugent live? And people are like, ha ha ha. And I'm like, no, I'm asking you actually a very serious question here. The first place I really became known was in Texas, and it's interesting. Well, he's there now. He's from Michigan, but I'm like, think about this. You're trying to push your so many of these kind of the peace, the pseudo peace, I call it. It's not real peace, but this pseudo peace thing that wants to push its idea of everybody somehow living in this kind of ho hum, no conflict, no violence world. And I'm like, the interesting thing about that utopian idea is that here it is. We've got, and I use Ted as an example of someone who speaks what he says. If I ask him, I've never met him.
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that if I ask him a question, he's going to give me a direct answer. He's not
Mhm.
going to bullshit me. I might not like the answer. To me, I have a lot more respect for that than I do for this sort of, pseudo peace, etc. thing.
Mhm.
I live in a sort of a hotbed of freaks, I guess you could say, and I'm proud to be one of those. But I mean, I think people are mistaking, a biological masculine and feminine. And
Mhm.
again, it's the anthropomorphization of putting that back on,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
actual
Well, a
spiritual
lot of that
experience. In the
really.
end, we're just
Okay.
fingers pointing at the
Okay,
moon,
okay,
but
Dale. A lot of that comes from really the teachings of Jesus, where he says things like, I and my Father are one. Um, and if you know me, you know the Father. So he's describing God himself in the masculine term there. So why would we?
what he said was he said Anna and Abba. So
Mhm.
he's not saying me Jesus, okay? And unless you actually know the actual texts, that's
Mhm.
the problem. You're kind of coming from corrupt data.
Mhm.
Abba is an interesting thing because Abba is not something that you would turn to your father and say Abba. It's not that kind of a term.
Mhm.
You have again, you got to understand what masculine and feminine mean. And I'm going to give you a primordial example of
Okay.
what this meant to the ancient Hebraic mind. Let's say I've got like a primordial smoke in my mouth. And of course, the first letter of the alphabet is the Aleph. It just sounds like this. Oh. And then all of a sudden, I bring my lips together and I make the second letter, which is bait, which is ab. That smoke's going to stop and it's going to have these two contiguous little clouds. Ab is the root sound
Mm-hmm.
for father in the way that it's used. It has nothing to do with a dad or a physical masculine father.
Mm-hmm.
What that actually means is the point where one becomes two. It's all about frequency. It was
Mm-hmm.
exemplified by the first letter, which literally looked like this. It was
Mm-hmm.
called ox.
Mm-hmm.
It was the aleph. And what the aleph was, the reason they called it ox, or you could even say bull, was because the ox used its entire body holistically, not just its brain,
Mm-hmm.
but its entire body holistically in a state of wholeness. And that's why it was so
Mm-hmm.
powerful. What does that mean?
Okay.
That means that true strength exists only when one is in unity.
Mm-hmm.
And when the birthing happens, the second letter was house, which was bet or bait. And what that is the differentiation between inside and outside. That's the birth of mother and father, that kind of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
But what he's talking about is behind that. Just because the translations say father, that's not what it was saying in the
Okay,
Aramaic.
so let's just say, from the aspect of say corrupt data, this country was founded basically on what you would call that corrupt data. They didn't have the interpretations that you do or the research or
Actually, it wasn't. You think America was based on Christianity? Have you? How much have you studied
uh,
actual U.S.? I grew up in
okay.
Philadelphia, so that's my childhood
Well,
there. Of
every university in the country was founded on the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's a
I'm not
fact.
talking about the university. I'm talking about the country.
Okay, okay, I
Yeah,
understand that. But the
yeah.
people that founded those universities were Christians, and they did that for Yale, Harvard, all of them, Princeton, all of them. Of course, they're not that way now. They're obviously teaching the opposite of that. But in the beginning, from the Magna Carta to the Declaration of Independence, all of them relied upon a divine being, which they believe was a fatherly figure. So what I'm saying is to you, Dale, is you and I are both speaking on high technology and broadcasting around the world as it is, and all the things that go with that. But all that, if you bring it back, it all comes back to the pilgrims when they landed there and they said, we're going to dedicate this land to the furtherance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what I'm saying is, and in the great reformations and the great revivals that happen in this country
Long way
have
around the
have
barn.
they put us whatever that beginning is when the pilgrims were on the ships and they made their agreement and then they came and then they declared this as land dedicated to God, whatever and however you dispute that, that has brought us to this. So I would say that whatever they started 500 years later, we're in a pretty good place. So
I
how is
think
it
we
that
are.
if their interpretation was so off, then how are we enjoying such benefits from it?
So you think that just because someone starts with corrupt data that they can't sustain some kind of an ideology or a belief system, or that something won't be successful just because kind of basically all of our culture. Let's put it this way. I live in the South. There's billboards all over the place in, King James English.
Mm-hmm.
Verily, verily, I say unto thee, all these different kinds of billboards, which of course that's a 17th century understanding, about 500 years old for us, of something that's 2,000 years old. The question that you're asking me has literally nothing to do with how our country is now, whether data had issues of corruption or not, about whether it would be, still look kind of successful compared to other places or not. They're absolutely apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that with
Well,
all the respect in
okay,
the
no,
world. So
I definitely understand, but let's compare, say, China, whose beginnings didn't come from that source of corrupt data as you describe it, and now they have lockdowns and they put people in prison. They have entire cities
do you know
of
how many variables go into that? Whether it be,
yeah.
the flavor of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many
Mm-hmm.
variables in all of it. I will say this, you know, um, I don't want to like Hugh Lee Greenwood here. But the more I visit other places, I got to say I'm proud to be American and I'm not going to be, out there, waving my hands exactly. But I don't think people understand, and I don't say frailty in a way of weakness. I don't think most,
Mm-hmm.
most Americans, and I'm not saying that about you, understand. It's almost like an apple of the eye situation. There's like an almost like a self entitlement. A lot of people feel like, as an example, my family, not me. There's a lot of military background. And, I have a lot of the sort of, hippie sort of peace types. And, I say pseudo peace types who, want to slam that. And I'm like, it's an interesting kind of place for you to be in, because not only have I lost lots of people who were defending this country, who's in a pretty amazing space, in
Mm-hmm.
that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of the ones that is
Mm-hmm. Well,
an
do you
anarchist or
understand my
anything like
point? Is that okay? Let me put it another way to you, Dale. If we had the correct understanding, and it sounds like you've done some pretty good research too. If we had, from the beginning, if we had the understanding that you're espousing here, where would we be as a country?
I don't know, but it would be, even more amazing. I'm not saying it's wrong. What I'm saying, it's low volume. Some places it is wrong. Some places very much. You can go from the King James, or not even, and I'm not even knocking the King James. It was considered a political document, not or political treatise, not a religious document. But it, like, you can just look at one of the 1611 versus the King James versus the New King James, which are all a little bit different. And my point in that is, if just because, I can hotwire something, I can do bad electrical work, it doesn't mean my house's electrical system isn't going to work. But if somebody comes along to me and says, you know what, I can increase your efficiency and your capacity by 80%, I can lower your energy expenditures, I'd be very interested in something like that. And that's what I'm speaking of. And it's not pissing on or disrespecting the person that put in the original
Mm-hmm.
wiring, and that's something that it's funny. I put a video out a few weeks ago on YouTube. It was called, it said the most difficult thing you will face is a way shower. And I only settled on the word way shower because I don't want to use light worker or all this new age crap that's out there. But I'm like, I didn't know what other word to use. And the most difficult thing was, especially me, being basically Christocentric, is that when I say things, and this is what we do as humans. You've had this experience, I've had this experience. The hardest part is when you say something, express something from a really deep space in your heart, especially on the first pass, people aren't even going to hear that. And I don't mean you. You're a lot deeper than, a lot of the conversations I would have on a daily basis. But what's first going to happen is it's going to shatter, or it's going to start shaking I want to say conditioning and indoctrination, but I'm not saying that as a bad thing. What I'm saying is, if I tell somebody, don't think about a purple elephant, you're all of a sudden thinking about a purple
Mm-hmm.
elephant. But if I say, don't think about an inner outer diddlywad, if you don't have a reference point in your head, there's nothing to actually think about. What
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying is, the hard thing about what I do is people generally, especially on first pass, often don't hear what I'm saying. They just hear what it's rattling loose within them. And that's just
Mm-hmm.
like me. If I go like to an auto mechanic seminar, I could probably stay conscious for about 3 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden, maybe not so much. Yeah, I'm not, don't misinterpret what I'm saying, that I'm somehow knocking our founding fathers, but
Right.
the
No, no.
country absolutely was not founded on Christianity. It absolutely was founded on religious freedom, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start digging into like the Pentecostal movements of, like, especially like places like Western New York,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole Joseph Smith thing and the Mormons and all that, you start looking into it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's many
Well,
places on the
do you agree?
planet where
Well,
we'd be able to do the things we do.
Dale, do you agree with
Yeah.
my earlier statement that all the major universities were founded on Christianity? All right, let's go to another question here. It says, the ocean has a masculine spirit and is alive. Have you heard of this?
The what? The ocean
The ocean. Yeah.
has a masculine spirit and is alive. Yeah, it's actually it's actually intriguingly, the ocean would be considered masculine and feminine, which
Mm-hmm.
is, the flowing and or retraction aspect would be feminine, and as far as alive, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to one other thing. Christianity is a personal concept. And, if we talk about particular, agreed upon doctrines, and I don't want to use the word dogmas per se, um, that the colleges were very much established under, and especially when we're speaking of the universities. I'm not talking about necessarily just community colleges.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely established on doctrines that were considered to be Christian. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my response to that.
The
Most people, I don't know that we know fully that even means. And of course, he wasn't a Christian anyway. So
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know Benjamin Franklin said one time, he said, the older I get, the more I'm convinced God rules in the affairs of men. So I'm hoping he's ruling, he's involved with the affairs going on in this country. But a lot of
well,
people,
God can't be separate. That's the mistake we're making, is we're turning it into some kind of, again, we're doing projecting human dualistic traits on
mm-hmm.
everything, on the
So do you,
entirety of what we're within.
okay, Dale Allen Hoffman, do you think that there is a undeniable truth, just truth in general? Do you think there is truth?
Truth, it's a funny concept, because the question itself it's almost like and I'm not saying this about you, it's a
Yeah.
self-mockery of itself.
All right.
If in order for something to have an ability to be denied, then you don't understand what truth is. You're taking something, again, that's absolute and manifesting it, and again putting dualistic qualities. Truth is beyond words. Truth is something that you can't have an accurate opinion about. You can't have even a full experience of, because in order to have the full experience, you literally would cease to be a separate being from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's like, once your heart gets that experience, the question kind of becomes something you can just sort of smile at and say, that's nice. But,
Mm-hmm.
and I am not disrespecting you in any way. This is a great interview,
No,
by the way. Thank you. I love this. I can't wait to share it. So,
hey, not a problem, Dale. Um, would you say that the sky is blue?
well, the funny, physics tells us the sky is the blue is the color that's not there.
Okay.
And it also tells us it's a refraction. It's the bending of the atmosphere of the earth. So I wouldn't say the sky is or isn't blue.
Would you
You
say
know,
would you say the absence of heat is cold?
it feels cold. Is it cold? I don't know. It feels it. Feels that to me. Feels cold.
Okay.
Feels what I call cold, which
Okay.
is, whatever they say, slower moving electrons.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get there from here, but this is a fun dance.
Are
I'm having
you
a
are
lot of fun with
you
it. So.
in your monitor? Are you looking at Daniel Ott?
I'm looking at my monitor. I see. I'm assuming you're Daniel Ott, because I've only known you for about a week. You're the
Right.
Cosmic Cowboy, right?
That's right.
Am I looking at you?
Yeah.
No, but I'm looking at like a representation. Absolutely.
Okay.
But that I assume is you. I don't know. You could be somebody completely different. I've never met you. So
No, that's cool. No, that's a good answer. That's good.
the only reason I even, what's cool is, yeah, I mean, you heard me on Joshua's show, but the first thing I did was I was like, well, let me go look at his site really quick. And when I saw that Josh was on yours, I didn't even ask him. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I had him on here, man, because I want to talk about Brown Mountain Lights because
which is just a little ways from us. So,
oh really? So it's Brown Mountain?
Yeah, I live in Asheville,
Oh,
so
do you?
it's just right. I say right up the road. It's from here about an hour and 20 minutes. He and I had talked like 15 years ago about
Mhm.
him and Micah and all those guys taking me out there and like leaving me out there overnight to see if I like picked anything up, but it
Yeah.
never actually happened. They told me they were going to lock me in the basements of haunted houses.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I was just at Brown Mountain about 2 weeks ago.
really, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in Asheville. I'm in West
Yeah,
Asheville.
and we
That's
went
cool.
through Asheville as well. And of course, now Asheville has sort of here from the Midwest. I mean, from of course whatever my limited sphere of contacts are that Asheville it has a lot of sort of businesses like tarot reading and maybe witchcraft. Is this true?
Well, it's funny. I make the joke when I'm around, different places, especially in the U.S. I'm like, you got to be careful walking downtown Asheville. You might trip and fall over a Reiki master. And I don't mean that as a disrespect, but there's some truth in that. Yeah, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. People will call it a spiritual epicenter or whatever. I've been here 20 years. Josh was a lifetimer until he moved to Puerto Rico and then Vegas. But I have to say, being here for a long time, maybe it's kind of similar to Sedona in that sense. I'm starting to see Asheville kind of take on a persona of itself, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So its reputation precedes itself.
Okay.
You know.
All right. We have this question here. There is verses in the Bible, and this from Jade says, "How do you interpret where it says no one gets to the Father but by me?" And I believe that was Jesus speaking.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to look at the actual line. What is the what was the verse? I'm trying to. Isn't that in two different places?
Well,
Is that the Gospel of John?
well, I don't know. We don't have the text
But
text there.
anyway,
So.
but I would have to, unless it was at the top of my head, from the Aramaic, I'd have to look at it. But I mean, here's the thing,
Mhm.
if someone's asking for an Aramaic interpretation and I just give my opinion,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean anything, is what I'm
Mhm.
saying. I'd have to
Mhm.
actually look at what it said
Mhm.
first. So
Mhm. Are you speaking on a headset?
yeah,
Okay. Well, I would say that's true, and doesn't that make that a truth?
what's true?
It is true that you're speaking on a
Well,
headset.
just because something's true doesn't make it a truth. It's apples and oranges, two
Dale,
completely different things.
come on, Dale.
So
You're fun,
yeah, I'm
man.
not. See, here's
You're a fun
my
guy,
point.
man. You're a real
I
fun
know.
guy.
Well, I know. Well, here's my point. Constantly, and this isn't a disrespect, bullshit babying shit down to a human level
Yeah.
and trying to speak of the divinity and the eternity that
Mhm.
is the absolute and project our cute little things on that. And all I can say is this: once your heart is wide open and your supposedly humanus Latin brain is
Mhm.
fried, all that stuff becomes nothing more than pissing in the wind and fingers pointing at the moon. And I say that
Mhm.
with all the respect in the world.
So,
20 years ago I would have batted the ball back and
yeah.
forth with you. Now it's just cute, and I'm not
Now,
disrespecting you.
no, of course not. I'm having fun with you, man. So would you consider yourself then a sort of a contrarian?
No.
I would say of a truth you
fuck
are,
fuck
but
the labels, man. All of the you know what I consider myself. I'm open. My license plate literally says open, which is funny. People. My wife is who's a model. People
Mhm.
will stop her. What is the license plate all about? It's like, well, not what you think. But
Mhm.
um, I here's my point. I don't. It's been a long time since I've nailed my furniture to the floor in an intellectual sense.
Mhm.
Because anytime I've ever thought I really had something figured out, and this is after decades and
Mhm.
decades and decades of looking under the rocks that I was told not to look under, looking under the rocks that everybody else that was an expert looked under. Uh, there After a while you start realizing that as soon as you nail something down, you're no longer open. You are no longer what Yeshua said before a
Mhm.
healing, a fatah, which means open.
Mhm.
You're now just a concept. You are, and I'm not saying you when I'm saying, but you become, when he spoke of that in which you judge another, you are guilty of practice. And
Mhm.
then he said, what was the word? Hypocrite. What does hypocrite
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm. Well, I grabbed this as you see in
Well, hold on. What does hypocrite mean?
a hypocrite, somebody who says something that they're probably
It's got a
guilty of
very
doing.
specific meaning in Aramaic. So the word's ape in Aramaic.
Yeah.
What ape means, funny because it's the same word as veil, the veil
Mhm.
of the temple.
Mhm.
What it means is persona. What does persona mean? Persona is a Latin word that meant mask.
Mhm.
The ape was a very specific mask that an actor would wear in a divine play in Yeshua's time. And they would, of course, begin that play wearing the mask.
Mhm.
And when it would lower, at ultimately the point of the end of the divine play is the mask would be dropped.
Mhm.
Most people are looking at this part of Jesus.
Mhm.
They're looking at the physical man. They're not understanding, as an example, the Anana is the bread of life. Anana is Nuhra de Alma, light of the world.
Mhm.
People are mistakenly looking at a
Okay.
human.
Okay. So Dale, you see, I've got this in the background. I found it
Uh-huh.
somewhere on the web, on
Mm-hmm.
some obscure website. Oh, you can't
It's all
see this.
bent out of shape.
Oh, you can't see our background.
No, I see it. It's just
Okay. Okay.
warped. It's warped.
Okay. So, all right. So, right there in big letters, I am. Now, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We were discussing what is truth. Jesus claims to be the truth. He also claims to be the I am. And in fact, when somebody asked him, they said, "Who are you?" He said, "I
You
am."
weren't listening to me earlier, were you?
I'm listening
This
to
is showing
myself,
me
and I
that
sound.
you
I'm
weren't
listening to
listening to
myself, and I
me.
sound pretty good. What do you got to say?
Okay. Well, I was talking about I am and what that was in Aramaic. It's
Yeah,
actually one word twice. There's no
yeah,
way to say I am in Aramaic. There's no
yeah.
am. I told you that's a
So okay,
Greek
okay.
concept,
So
ego
going with
eimi.
your giving you credit then. Did Jesus misspeak?
Number one, I you didn't hear what I said earlier, which is that he didn't say I am. If he said I am, according to what the texts say, he would say, as an example, and I already said this, but I'll repeat it
Okay, go
again.
ahead. Go ahead.
Ana lakma dahai, I Jesus, Ana, am the bread of life, as an example. But that's not what was said. In the Aramaic, it says anana, which is the I within the I, or I. In other words, it's something that can't possibly be confused as a physical human being. But again, what you're looking for is what is looking. But if I'm saying that to someone who doesn't have, I don't want to say the reality structure, but the realization to comprehend it, and that's not a
Mhm.
put down.
All right, no
I
problem.
could speak until I'm blue in the face, and
Well,
you wouldn't
I'm
hear it.
trying to
So
find. I'm trying to determine, Dale, that through the centuries of the reading of the text that we have, and you mentioned the King James version.
you
So
mean the ones that were changed over just after the first into
right,
the
so
second
right, so
century?
right, so so I'm giving you credit. I'm saying so we're going with your interpretation and your reading, and I give you credit again for your research. Obviously, it's very well researched. However, it was allowed by in some shape or form to come through the centuries, and many people have dedicated their lives to it and have had changed lives. And as I said, this country has benefited from that. So why would we want to go back and say, well, what you learned isn't so correct? This is correct. So if we did have the correct version, would we be an entirely different type of person?
Yeah, we wouldn't be an entirely different type of
We would
person.
be
That's
more
kind of
toward it,
it's like a
whatever.
7-year-old way. What's that?
We'd be more toward a representation of say how you are because you have this understanding. Let's just say your understanding. How has it benefited you? What has this knowledge done for you?
Completely transformed my life and allowed me to see through it.
Okay.
Allowed me to see through the part of myself that I thought was real,
Mm-hmm.
that intellectual part that I was so sure of, that thought it had figured things out. And, there's no way that I can give that to you.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way I can give it to you.
So if you were to put it on a resume and said, "Here, Daniel, I'm going to email it to you," what would you say about Dale? You're a good guy. You're a man of understanding and wisdom.
I'm
Uh,
Dale.
okay. Well, I'm just saying, man. If you got a better way, then I want to know
At
about
least
it.
that's what I call myself.
Okay. Okay.
See,
Okay.
this is going to be the I can't wait to get this out to people, because this is, and I say this with all love in my heart, this is the perfect example of why I do what I do.
Okay.
This is a perfect example of why it's important. Maybe someday you'll comprehend and understand what I'm saying about that. But I think and I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart. I'm honored to be on the show, because there's going to be stuff I'm going to get out of this too that's going to
Mm-hmm.
show me biases that I'm not aware of, which is
Mm-hmm.
what I was talking
Mm-hmm.
about in the beginning. That's why I read atheist material,
Mm-hmm.
satanic. Josh did the Inside the Church of Satan film like 15 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we actually helped put some funding into that. And me, with everything that I thought I knew back then, I thought I knew what the Church of Satan was. I thought they worship Satan. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
anything about them. So, but
So me and I appreciate it. You don't have to apologize how you think I will interpret things because I mean you're on the show, so I don't take it that way. But I myself, and maybe representing at least some people of my ilk and belief system type of thing structure, I'm pretty happy, and I feel when we talk about this. If we talk about say the spirit of God and the feeling of a oneness and a universality to the presence of God, I've felt that in my ignorance. So why would I want to be less ignorant and possibly uh, minimize those feelings and those intuitions that the presence of God is with me, even in the knowledge that I have right now?
hey, whatever works for you works for you. But you brought me on your show, and I agreed to do it. So If I kind of pulled you on mine and I was trying to move you into whatever you think my way of thinking is, the
Mhm.
shoe would be on a very different foot. So
Mhm.
what I'm saying is if it works for you, that's awesome. That's great. And I think for most people, it would be enough. It wasn't enough for me.
Well, I look at this like in the Bible it talks about Mars Hill, where Paul went to Mars Hill, and at Mars Hills where everybody brought their religion and brought their belief system, and they told stories, and everybody wanted to hear what others had to say. And when Paul came up there, he was talking about this figure named Jesus, and they said, you know what, we want to hear that, we want to hear some more from you. So once you come back, he was invited back, and so you were invited on this show because this is like a sort of like a Mars Hill. And so I'm thinking, hey, is there a better way? Do you have the knowledge that you have? How could it benefit the listeners? And so,
You haven't heard what I was saying. That's what's great about it. That's why I had to keep repeating things. That's why I told you it's a challenge
well,
of what
is
I do
belief?
when
Wait
I
a minute.
explained about the II as an
Well,
example.
is it that I don't hear you, or you haven't made a good case yet?
Well, maybe it's not possible to make a good case if one's not open to someone who's
I
not
have
as
to be
open.
open because you're on the show.
Well, that's true to an extent. Just like Alex Jones could be, pretty open when he brings
Mhm.
people on to chew them alive. So,
Mhm.
but I'm not saying you're chewing me alive. I know. I don't have to keep defending
No,
that.
no,
No, I love the dialogue.
you already won points with me when you mentioned a Ted Nugent.
I grew up with Ted. I mean, I didn't
you won
physically grow
you
up
won
with
some
him
points
live.
for me, credibility points right there.
Well, I'm just saying, Live Gonzo was like, my one of my
Yeah,
musical bibles as a kid. Well,
yeah.
I was going to say something, but I can't. Can't. I don't want to repeat that on the show. Something he said on the
Hey, listen,
album.
man,
But
I grew up playing air guitar to Stranglehold, so
awesome.
I mean that if you ever play air guitar, Stranglehold is the song to play.
So that's an interesting. There's an interesting thing there, and it's kind of a side note to what we're talking about here. But let's just say that I bet you I can go to, and not saying it's exactly like Christianity, but I bet I could go to 80% of Ted Nugent fans, and I can ask them, "What do you think of Ted's voice?" And they'll say, "Oh, I love it. I grew up with him." And then 80% of those people would go, oh, when I said that wasn't Ted's voice. People thought he was singing. No, he's playing guitar. How many people actually know something like that?
Mm,
It's kind of like that with Christianity. It's like when people talk about something being founded on Christianity, and I always have to put it in quotes, I have to say, what is Christianity? What is your concept of what that is? Is it certain principles or doctrines that they, thought that was that they
mm,
established it on? Yeah, absolutely.
mm,
But that doesn't mean it's funny, Christianity. Do you know how many? Well, this was according to what was it? I believe it was something like 17,500 forms in 2001 of Christianity. And I mean, any philosophy is going to go off in its own little
mm,
direction. But,
mm,
the point I'm making is, and that's why I love this interview, because it's this huge spotlight on the difference between relationship with concept versus going toward that absolute base level. I almost want to say, I love that you use the word indigenous in the, indigenous tones, whatever, that real primal direct, I don't want to say direct
mm,
experience, like beyond that, and going back to that source that he was trying to point us back toward, to
mm,
fry our, Episcopalian priest Cynthia Bourgeot, she talks about the parables, and she said Yeshua's parables were meant to fry our sockets,
mm,
like that, having those true, absolutely, wide open experiences instead of
mm,
just kind of, and I did that for a long time. I
mm,
lived with the concepts, and I still have to use them to communicate.
mm.
um
So Dale, Dale, were the Puritans, were they Buddhist?
what were they? You're going to say they were Christians, right?
I didn't
And
say
what I'm you're not
that's a
this
question.
is
I
this is
wouldn't.
showing me you're not listening to what I'm saying. What version of
Well,
Christianity are you talking about?
that's not the version of Christianity. I'm talking about historical truth. Were they Buddhist or Islamic or what?
And I'm throwing the question back to you.
Well, it sounds like it's an evasion, not throwing the question back. It's an evasion because it seems like it kind of might
You mean
stick
what
in
did
your
they call
throat.
themselves or what they were? Here's what
Okay.
I'm telling you. There is
Okay.
no such thing as one form of Christian.
Mm.
That's the part you keep skirting around here for the whole
Mm.
time I've been on here.
Dale. Now I'm
That's
thinking you're
like when we
scared.
were, well, when we were talking about like the universities and
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
That was the point I'm trying to make here, is that
All
there's
right.
no one form of Christianity. There is no such thing as
Okay. Okay. All
this
right.
is
Okay. Okay.
Christianity.
Okay. Were they any form of Christianity? Were they any form of Christians, the Puritans?
The Puritans, yes.
Yeah. They were former Christians.
They were a form. They called themselves Christians. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Hey, well, here's good news for you. This book, what is this book in our background? What is it about?
It's just about using the words of Yeshua, of Jesus, to, I use some of the basic words. Um, Trying to see if I can pull up the link on Amazon for the book. You know, using some of the words that Yeshua used, words like spirit, breath, amen, things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
actually using them to tone them in his Aramaic language. Like the word Lord. Lord comes from the Old English Slofwerd, which of course
Mm-hmm.
is meant loaf board. It came out of feudalism, 8th, 9th century feudalism, where the actual word, of course, Kyrios in the Greek, several words in Hebrew like Adonai, but in Aramaic, the primary word was Maria. A lot of people don't know that. And
Mm-hmm.
toning Maria is a pretty good one to, it's a pretty good one to tone to allow yourself to get into something. It's like the difference between, having, like, I can say the word Lord for 2 hours nonstop, but if I actually get into the word Maria and get myself in there, to me, it's something that was very normal
Mm-hmm.
2,000 years ago in that culture, but it's kind of gone down. It's still held up by within Judaism today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's one of the things, like with the Aramaic, when I really started listening to it, it had a very particular lilt, like the beginning of, the Gospel of John, Bereshit, Etuihua, Milta, just has particular sounds. So the book's in 3 sections. The first section is basically how I get into what I'm doing, like not necessarily when I first started studying Aramaic, but when I started to really hear it for the first time, which is what made the difference. Looking at it on the page was okay, but if you ever try to learn a language from a book, it's not fun. The first section is that it's about the experience of the death of my mother, and just having the awareness. Someone gave me the gift of, they were like, my mother, strongest person I've ever known, 15 years ago, just a few weeks ago, that she passed
Oh, sorry to hear
in
that.
2007. And someone gave me a gift before I was, back in New Jersey at her bedside. And she had softball sized tumors all over her body. She
Ooh,
was basically, I think what did they say? She was like 57 pounds.
ooh.
And someone said, get up in the bed with her and hold her in your arms. And I found myself getting up in the bed with her, and the tones that I had been working with the Aramaic, I started toning with her. I started toning the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. And I have like a section in the book about that, how the last sound that she made was just a sound, which is the letter mem, which is represented by ripples of water. It meant water, flow, expanse. It was the sound for what we would say as mother. And it was the last sound she was able to make in her life. And it was just this profound experience, that the last sound she was able to make, she couldn't say, I love you anymore. I'm just like holding her in my arms, toning these ancient sounds that are even older than Aramaic, just from an Aramaic standpoint. And it was amazing that, I was toning her out with water, essentially through vibration, and the way that she brought me in with water. And then our daughter, Shemaiah, who was born several years after that, how I toned the Aramaic Lord's Prayer during and after her birth. That's the first section, is how I got into this. The second section kind of picks things apart, shows people, part A's, like the levels of translation from the obvious to the allegorical to the midrash, or comparing down to the sod level. Sod means secret, but not secret like you're not allowed to see it. What it actually means is something that's literally right in front of your face, but you can't see it, because all that you're able to see is the codes that your intellect is projecting upon it. So you're not even seeing the actual thing. So that the middle is kind of going deeper into the language itself. And then the third section of the book is actually toning. How do you tone as couples facing each other? How can you bring it into a church service? How can you do, make toning circles, etc., like that? Um, it's I'm really happy with the way it turned out, because I was able to keep. I promised myself to keep it under 200 pages, and to keep it simple, at least
Mhm.
in the beginning. The middle part gets a little heavy with some of the the picking apart, etc. But
Mhm.
yeah,
What
it's
what I'm interested in, Dale, is uh, how do you think a person who would say get your book, study your book, and maybe even agree with the tenets of it, would they be more spiritual? Would they be more happy? Would they be more forgiving, more
that's
loving?
completely theirs, not mine. I have no control over that.
Right,
You
of
know, you
course
can
not. But
lead. I can say you can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink. But you know, it's funny that there's a lot of books I read on first pass that I don't think much of anything happened to, and then they came back to me several years later when I was ripe and I was open, and they completely peeled my heart wide open and gave me even more of a cosmic vision that I it doesn't mean there was anything wrong with me 10 years earlier. There's so many books that I've got on my shelves that on first pass didn't really do a lot for me. Some of the Gnostic texts were like that, you know. Some of the there was a great book called The Imitation of Christ that I remember the first time it dropped into my lap. I was like, I don't know, not much for me. And then it was like 5 years later it came back after I'd already read it all the way through, and it really got me on a deep level. I have no control over that. Would it make someone more spiritual? You know, again, it's another one of those, you know, things that there's nothing I can do about
so
that. So
how would your belief and teachings uh, play out in downtown Asheville? Would it be are there receptive folks down there?
I think they're all down there. You know, you'll have somebody with you'll have like groups of American flags and you know semi-automatic weapons right next to LGBTQ people with purple hair, right next to abortion pro-choice abortion, pro-life. Well, they say pro-life, but you know, all of that, you know, would go there. You know, I know what it feels like for me to be open. I know the effect it's had on my personal relationships in my family with my children, my babies, my wife, the people that I mentor on a one-on-one basis. You know, it took me a while to get to the place where I realized what I know doesn't really mean anything. You know, it's that place that goes beyond knowing, where you need a knower plus a known and gets to that place of realization that just goes beyond words. And you know, if it worked in downtown Asheville or not, I don't care. It's funny, once I started having those more direct experiences, and the breath and the toning is a lot to do with that, I lost interest in how it was being received. So, or whether it was or wasn't. I just do it from a pure place, and that's
Mm,
enough for me.
mm. I noticed the sort of the accent on pro-life people. How do you view those folks?
Yeah, well, I don't have a yes or a no in it, because what's interesting is it's just the framing of saying, almost like making, you know, it's rotten on both extremes. Because let me put it this way: I've met people who use abortion as birth control, which is quite nauseating, you know. And on the opposite side, I know people who really are pro-life, and I know lots of people who are um, I don't know what I would even call them. You know, it's not about the phrase itself. My response, and
Mm,
you notice I did it with both, though. You only
mm,
picked up on the one because I started to say abortion and then said pro-choice and then went to pro-life. So I did it on both sides. Neither of them am I completely comfortable with because,
yeah,
you know, again, it's another example of forcing some sort of idea on someone else.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, you know,
I noticed that all the pro-abortion folks are alive. So, but yeah, so
it's not
it's
funny, but I mean,
it's
I
kind
hear
of
you.
it's kind of weird there. But
Yeah, so my cousin
is
was
it?
raped when I was a kid,
Mhm,
brutally, brutally raped.
mhm,
Um, all I can say is, and you don't need to know anything else of the story, but what I will say is, it's so easy to kind of stand outside of something, and any blanket statement, I don't care who's making it, is utter bullshit, is
mhm,
utter BS, belief systems.
mhm.
It's the blankets that are the problem with us. It's the, you know,
So
trying to
do you
have the
find
illusion of the legislation of morality. And I don't care which end it's on. I don't care if someone
I
calls
understand.
himself a conservative or a liberal,
So
you
do you
know.
find say like say in a um, in a sort of Asheville atmosphere, do you find you have to walk a, a line, or you'll be either dismissed or hated
Oh,
or loved
I
and
wouldn't care
embraced?
anyway. I'd probably get off on it in some way, maybe, but
All
no,
right.
no,
All
no.
right.
That's the thing that's weird about Asheville is it's everything. It has this.
Mm,
It's probably I would think it leans more liberal in some ways, but its conservative nature is pretty strong too.
yeah.
So
We have a town like that here in Indiana called Bloomington, Bloomington, Indiana.
I've been there before.
It's the
Yeah,
home of IU, and they have a lot of the, you know, uh, tattoo parlors, uh, tarot
I know exactly
cards.
what. Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah,
And
yeah.
at the
And
same time, that whole area is surrounded by Pentecostals and gun-toting, Bible-believing people. So it's all just like Asheville. But they all get along.
somebody told me at one point there was more, and I don't know if this is true, that there was more churches. I've heard it a bunch of times in West Asheville proper, where we live, than any other place of that size. And I've never been able to confirm or deny that. I've even talked to the local newspaper, but I told them maybe it just seems that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, my whole point in living my life is moving from the difference between something conceptual and something that's directly realization. And what another people, not like I say, like if someone asks me about how do I love my baby or why or something like that, it's a ridiculous question. That doesn't need to be analyzed intellectually in that way. But I
Mhm.
mean, for a long time people couldn't. I wasn't really very open. And when I finally got to the point where I started really listening to the people that had
Mhm.
the opposite ideas, that's
Mhm.
when things really started shifting. So,
Hmm. Well, I
it
certainly,
doesn't matter to me what people think. What matters is that for me, it feels authentic.
hmm.
So,
Well, I certainly have had many people on this show that had the exact opposite opinion of myself, but I don't have them. I don't have people on the show to so I can hear my belief system being validated. I don't need validation. But what I do like to know is what other people have learned through their life experiences. And Dale Allen Hoffman, I appreciate you coming on the broadcast. How can people get your book?
it's on Amazon.com. Echoes of an Ancient Dream. Just put Dale Allen Hoffman. Yeah, it's been great being on because yeah, I literally, not for a microsecond, and this is rare. I never felt talked down to. I never felt anything like that. I was constantly apologizing just so you didn't think I was. Um, this is the kind of dialogue that. Now, let me just cap that with one little thing. DaleAllenHoffman.com is my website. I've got a YouTube, but there's the word peace in Aramaic is shlama. Everybody knows shalom from the Hebrew. And what's interesting is there's like sort of this hippie-ish idea of peace as like a cessation of conflict. Like I said, kumbaya, and everybody lives in harmony. But that's not actually what peace means. What peace means is the literal translation for shlama was that all voices were invited to the council fire and allowed to speak fully without threat. And to me, that's the thing that's still not happening. That's why I'm loving this experience. That people can't hear other opinions, whatever that may be, without feeling somehow threatened. But this kind of dialogue, this is why I said I can't wait to share it. This kind of dialogue is what needs to happen. And I'm just saying I respect you highly and honor you.
Hmm.
And I do not think, in the same way you do, but it doesn't matter. And I didn't, it's been cool. It's been a fun experience. So
Well, I say tonight, iron has sharpened iron. And Dale, I appreciate you coming on the Edge broadcast, and I'll send you links when it's edited and permanently uploaded.
cool.
So thanks for coming on the show.
Totally.
All right, bye bye. All right, everybody, that was.